Starting it. Can you hear me now? Hello?
Yep.
You can hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, it froze momentarily because I was just starting the
Okay.
video.
I'm waiting for it, then I'll resend it.
Okay, it's tweeted. I'm not going to have the chat window open as we do this because it sort of slows down my system, but if people tweet, I'll look on my phone at Twitter or whatever.
Okay. I'm waiting to get it. Did you mention my name in it?
Yeah.
Oh.
You get it?
No, starting now. I'm joining. Is that what I say?
I already tweeted you, so it should be out.
Yeah, I did. So I say, okay, I'm retweeting.
You can just retweet it.
Okay, that's what I did.
Okay, starting now. Okay, good. Alrighty, so here we are. I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina. Spent election day in Fayetteville, North Carolina. Half hours east of here. And wow, stunning stuff. I've been getting a lot of compliments today, saying that I predicted certain elements of what ended up transpiring. I don't feel necessarily vindicated. I mean, I think I just held true to what I thought was happening, and ended up correct in certain ways. But I don't take pleasure from it necessarily. So I guess we could delve. I mean, and I still haven't delved thoroughly into the data. But what did you get? Let's put it this way: what did you get wrong?
Well, hi everybody, or hi you and everybody. I'm upstate New York. I stayed here for the election. I would just pivot back to the last time we were together. We were in a hotel room in Lewiston, Maine, and it wasn't Carnal, that was the Saturday night that the bus video came out.
It was a Friday. The Billy Bush video came out on a Friday afternoon. This was a Friday.
And I basically said, "This is done. We're over. We're gone. I don't even say it's pointless being here talking to Trump voters. This is the end of the election." And I maintained that for about a week, and so I got that terribly wrong. And I think I even told you on the car ride home. I said, if Trump gets over 40%, I'll owe you an apology. And Trump got over 40%.
Apology accepted.
And I got it wrong. I'm stunned. I had pivoted towards the end towards saying my standard line to people was, I don't know who's going to win this election, but in the next decade, a Trump character will win.
Okay, but let's just, and again, this is not being accusatory at all. It's just an assessment of what happened.
I can be accusatory. I was a trader for 20 years. I get lots wrong.
Okay. Well, just on that day and that weekend of the so-called Access Hollywood tape or whatever, that was seen as the big event of the election thus far, right?
Why
at that point you were dead certain. There was no ambiguity in the way that you presented it. You were certain that Trump was done. So what did you misinterpret?
Wow. I used a banking analogy. It was a bank run. There was a bank run on his campaign. Depositors were fleeing, but it wasn't depositors who were fleeing. It was just support. It was just the big lenders, the donors, and they weren't the Trump campaign at all. His campaign was one of his small depositors, to use the analogy, meaning his supporters. They weren't going to give up because they didn't care. Some of the people who fled during that period were Republican office holders. So there were some senators who rescinded their endorsement of Trump, and some of whom actually re-endorsed later. Yeah, it had all the looks.
But they weren't integral to the Trump operation, really. So, I mean, why should they rescinding their support have been taken as some sign that he was doomed? I don't. That's what I didn't get at the time.
That was my mistake. That was my mistake, to forgetting that his campaign was about his voters, not about his organization, which he had none. And I just thought that, in a vacuum where he had nothing, he had nobody other than his voters, he couldn't survive. And that, in retrospect, that was his whole campaign, was his voters. So I was wrong in that sense. I've forgotten what had made him appealing to this. I forgot what made him work, which was it was all about the voters in many ways, right? There was no campaign. That's the amazing thing about this election, is the lack of professionalism. If it had been done by a liberal populist, would be celebrated as a folk hero. This guy with no structure, no professional campaign people, who just kind of winged it. Winged it. Managed to kind of knock down all these professionals.
It was a meme, or it was a talking point, or it was conventional wisdom for a long time that Trump had no ground game, quote unquote, right? Whereas Hillary had this amazingly robust ground game, and it was going to be her quote unquote firewall, and all these cliches that are used by people who want to portray themselves as savvy about the intricacies of electoral politics. But Trump did have a ground game. I went to a bunch of offices, local Republican parties, which have been converted into Trump headquarters. I went to the Republican Party headquarters in, I guess it's Warren County, Ohio. So maybe a half hour northeast of Cincinnati, or an hour. And it was a Trump campaign office. There was ground game. It was the Ohio Republican Party, which had defied the wishes of Kasich, who declined to endorse Trump, or actually opposed Trump. He wrote in John McCain. That was his big act of defiance. But this was a campaign office, and it was ground game. I mean, it wasn't like the most amazing get out the vote effort of all time, but it was something. And there was just this weird denial on the part of the pundit class that even existed. I mean, the Republican Party, since it lost in 2012, had enormous resources to its party building apparatus and its cultivation of a base of voters from which it could draw for the forthcoming presidential election in 2016, because they wanted to learn from their failures of 2012. Now, they didn't know Trump was going to be the nominee at the time, so that complicated things, obviously. But I don't know. It just seems like some of what happened on the ground didn't fully comport with what actually happened operationally. Or no, let me restate that. Some of what happened on the ground, I feel, didn't comport with the media representation of what Trump's operation consisted of.
I mean, I think it's fair. You know this better than I do, so I would posit that the ground game is not what was still a weakness to him relative to more than a strength. But I don't think it mattered. I mean, I think what's interesting when you look at the results was, and this is something you were much more aware of than others, was Clinton didn't turn out her voter. No one cared. No one came to vote for her. People came to, it's almost like we've learned now that, or the Democrats learned that, when you run somebody who's solely, the lesser of two evils, people just don't get excited about going out and voting. I mean, she got very few votes. And Trump got less than Romney did, and he still won. And so,
we don't have the full. I mean, that may well end up being true that he got less than Romney, but we don't have the full popular vote in yet, so that could tick up a little bit. But just to stipulate that.
But she didn't inspire a lot of people to go out and vote. No one, and I think that's, to me, what is the story of the election, has always been one, is she represented the establishment, the kind of crusts, old, tired, rigged, corrupt, selfish, this kind of amorphous blob that had built up,
oblivious,
since the 70s, this managerial class that had come in with all these, these technocrats who come in and changed Washington, D.C., changed my industry, banking, and made a lot of money off of it, and did well for themselves, and rigged the system, and bailed themselves out when they fucked up. It was the kind of the smart front row kids who came in with policy papers and wanting to deregulate everything and wanting to destroy anti-monopoly powers and put the market in everybody's life.
This is a point that I was harping on, not just since this
but
campaign.
It's kind of like, not to keep. I'll make one last thing. It was kind of like, it's what you read in Vox these days. This, everything is a spreadsheet and good and can be solved with, letting the market solve it. And it was, and interestingly enough, and ironically enough, it fell and collapsed in the most front row kid way ever, which was in polls saying it had a 99% lead.
Yeah, I mean, that's just unbelievable. I mean, this is sort of an aside, but the dominance of the polling industry, and the way that people think about politics, is just so out of proportion.
But it was very fitting.
There are many things that need a reckoning after all this, but that's one of them. I mean, the over-reliance on polling just as a guide for what everyone is supposed to talk.
To me personally, it's very fitting to my view that it all collapsed with mathematical big data based approach saying it's inevitable. In my mind, the overturning of that philosophy that had dominated for the last 25, 30 years, of course, happened with them getting it massively wrong. It reminded me a lot personally of the financial crisis. I was a PhD in math or physics who went to Wall Street and built models like that and took over Wall Street, and we collapsed it. And when we collapsed it, we bailed ourselves out. So I feel like it's all tied together in that sense, and she represented that world that bailed itself out.
Yeah, the point about Hillary being unable to turn out the voters, or her inability to have the Obama coalition that people forget the coalition that Obama assembled in 2008, and then which atrophied some for 2012, but remained enough intact that he was able to, galvanize it sufficiently to win. I mean, and an electoral accomplishment that Obama achieved because he had some singular political talents. And, people kind of looked at that as sort of the norm now after 2 cycles where it was active. But that was just a fundamentally fallacious way of looking at things. There was no reason to suppose that Hillary Clinton was just going to seamlessly and automatically attract that same coalition. And in fact, there was every reason to disbelieve it. I mean, people would cite that she got a majority of the black vote in the Democratic primary as evidence that it would somehow translate to the general election, but none of that was ever borne out in data. So these people always talk about how data oriented they are, but a lot of the data actually contravened some of their fundamental assumptions, and they ignored it anyway. I mean, Bernie Sanders during the primary process always polled a lot better against Trump than Hillary did.
Well, I think
if their concern was really defeating Trump, and if their concern was fielding a candidate who would be viable and be electable, then they would have nominated Bernie Sanders. But they rebuked the data. So there's some other pathology going on here with them that isn't purely an obsession with.
Well, I think anybody,
with data, it's they're grafting their ideology onto this sort of like phony.
It's using the data to argue their case. But I think somebody on Twitter today, to me, pointed out, which is I think very true, which was Sanders winning so easily in Michigan was a canary in the coal mine for Hillary's problems in the Rust Belt. And I should have seen the problems in the Rust Belt, because that's the part of the country I spent the most time in. That's the part of the country that I spent my time in. I'm like, holy fuck, are these places really screwed over? And not only are we screwed over, but these are the places I met people who had voted for Obama, who were not going to vote for Hillary at all. These are people who I'd met who, the Reagan Democrats, and I met a lot of them. And I just didn't put it all together and say, hey, you know what? It's going to be a problem in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin.
Yeah, as you know, I've been on the road now for, what is it? 12 days, 13 days. And I spent time in Western Pennsylvania, Southern Ohio, and now all around Western and Central North Carolina. And I'm not exaggerating. I made a point to talk to younger people about how they were feeling about the election, right? So I talked to people of all ages and colors and creeds and whatever. But I specifically sought out younger people when I could. And I didn't find not one soul. And again, these are random encounters. It's going to be a skewed sample. It's just my own personal experience, blah, 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 blah. But I didn't find one person in any of these states who I could characterize as enthusiastic, any person under the age of 30 in any three of these states, which were vital to the election, who I would characterize as enthusiastic about Hillary Clinton. Now, some of them said they would vote for Hillary Clinton, but solely because they wanted to stop Trump. And they would say, oh, God, I can't believe I have to vote for Hillary, right? But where if you went back, and these were black people, white people, Hispanic people, men, women. I mean, one of the most fervently anti-Hillary people that I met actually was a young black woman. Not that that should matter. And again, it's purely anecdotal. There was this young black woman in Cincinnati, voted for Obama, progressive, but said, hell no, I'm not voting for Hillary. So she filled out her ballot. And I guess there's some option in Ohio where you can, I don't know, she essentially left the presidential field blank and then voted for all Democrats down ballot, right? So, I mean, that's a person you wouldn't even know existed if you followed the predominant media coverage, but I encountered them everywhere.
When I was in Cleveland for the convention, I didn't go down to the convention. I just spent half my time in Central. I think it's the oldest housing project, federal housing project in the United States, built in the 30s, all black, very poor. And then I spent Althwaite houses. And I spent my time in Parma, an all-white neighborhood. And one of the things I had in a draft of my piece was, I noted on Twitter at the time, and I didn't think more about it, was the enthusiasm. When I was in Parma, I got a lot of enthusiasm for Trump amongst the whites. And when I got into the black community, I didn't get enthusiasm for Hitler. I expected a lot more anger, but at the time I phrased it as, there wasn't anger at Trump as much as resignation. Just a sense of, oh, geez, we've seen a lot of this before in our lives. But there was not enthusiasm for Hillary. And I was kind of struck by it at the time. I was like, I expected to go in there and put a mic, and talk to people, and I would be like, this, wow, man, this sucks, Trump is...
And this lack of enthusiasm for Hillary, it was discernible in the polling data. So it's not as if it came as just an out of nowhere shock. But the thing is, people were so fixated on Trump and the prototypical Trump supporters, that became this sort of anthropological phenomenon, right? Everybody was obsessed with Trump. Everybody was obsessed with Trump, so they didn't devote resources to sussing out what it was that caused people to be so disinterested or uninterested in Hillary Clinton, especially in minority populations, because there was this groupthink that congealed. And then, there's, I think, sort of part of it was an impulse to protect Hillary from criticism, just because they felt Trump was such an enormous threat that he had to be defeated at all costs. But what that led to was an analytical deficiency where there was not preparation for what was borne out on election day, which is that black voters didn't like Hillary anywhere nearly as much as they liked Obama.
Yeah, and in my pieces, I try to make a point, and where I could, is always balancing the Trump voters with African American supporters of Clinton, and so they're in my pieces, but I don't know if I reflected the lack of enthusiasm I saw.
But why wasn't that a theme? I mean, it was discernible in the polling data. It was discernible anecdotally, for me anyway. So why wasn't that a big theme that everyone was aware of? What is Hillary's problem with that black voters? Like, just as Trump's problems with Paul Ryan and with people like that, those were extensively documented, right? His problems with Mormons were documented. I even wrote a piece on his problems with Mormons. So, I mean, but you saw virtually nothing about Hillary's quote-unquote problem with black voters. I just want to know why.
I guess, it wasn't, I don't know. That's a good question. I don't have any answer for that. But I certainly noticed it, and I other than a little Twitter rant, I didn't write about it. But I think the it was just an election which a relatively small group of white voters felt very enthusiastic and came out and voted.
Okay, but let's acknowledge that Trump, and this should totally just obliterate conventional wisdom, because if you had said this in May or June or July or August, which I did actually, I said it in May, because it was indicated in the polling data at the time. So this is another thing. People selectively interpret data. There were polls that came out around May, which showed Trump potentially overperforming Romney with non-white voters. And sure enough, he did. He won, according to one of the exit polls, and I have to look at this a little more deeply, but one exit poll showed Trump winning 21% of non-white voters. So that's a fifth of all non-white voters voted for Trump. That's not a majority. It's not a plurality. But that's a substantial number of people, but you never would know it. You never would know that they even exist.
Again, I think all these conversations go back to just a lack of enthusiasm for Hillary, and I think that for Clinton's, and I think that very much, to me, it's less about the small narratives in there, but more about the bigger picture, which was this was just kind of a tired old regime that was falling. The kind of out of touch, DC, New York City, Washington consensus that had been taken down in the GOP primary, and then was taken down in the national election. And in both cases, not many people were enthusiastic about supporting it. And I guess my whole feeling has always been, after like a week before the election, after all this time on the road, my feeling was kind of, it was going to fall one time or another. Eventually it was going to fall. Maybe they could cobble together a victory this time, because of the weaknesses of Trump personally, and his erratic qualities. Maybe they could cobble together a Clinton victory, but eventually it was going to come apart. There was going to come another Trump eventually. And I don't want to sound crass, but if you believe this was eventually going to happen, get it over with now. Get it out of the way. And
thinking back to the period around the Access Hollywood tape when you and I came to different conclusions, or tentatively different conclusions. Think when you reflect back on that, can you recall anything that I said, or what was about it, about my perspective maybe, that was a little more on the mark? This isn't meant to be self-flattering at all, because I don't. That's not what I'm after. It's just it's useful to, I think, reflect on this, because you can just account for mistakes and try to.
I think my rendering at the time was that you were delusionally anti-Hillary, so you were going to take any news as giving whatever news came the benefit of the doubt. That was my sense at the time. Perhaps.
So maybe you were underrating the antipathy toward Hillary among people, younger people.
Yeah, I was, and I guess I expected people to do their good duty and just march out and vote for her. I mean, I voted for her. I didn't do so with a lot of enthusiasm, but I was frustrated enough. I was angry enough even that I dragged myself out of bed at 6:10 in the morning to make sure to get there and vote. And I was intending to write in a write-in because I was so frustrated with the whole election, but I found myself voting for her just because I didn't want to see him. I so badly did not want to see him as president. So, and I expected more people would have done the same thing, I guess, but apparently not. I guess what I'd like to pivot the conversation a little bit too, only because it's my frustration right now, is the lack of recriminations. The sense that it's just everybody's going forward saying, I messed this one up, let's go forward, without anybody saying, well,
no, I can't. I mean, I totally, I know where you're going with this, and I agree 100%. Like, is there any accountability at all in this field?
No.
I mean, if people are disastrously wrong over and over and over again, shouldn't they face some kind of social sanction or professional sanction?
Again, to go back to my point on the financial crisis, this isn't just me wanting vengeance for people who I felt disagreed with. This is dangerous because it happened with the financial crisis. Those people who got it wrong doubled down and denied that they had gotten anything wrong. And I feel partially why we're here is because of that attribute.
Yeah, you had the Huffington Post data team or poll interpretation team predicting with, what was it, 95% certainty that Hillary was going to win, and they said that she was going to get 330 electoral votes? So do the people who were involved in coming to that conclusion have to pay any price at all, or are they just going to continue with their jobs and keep making projections?
It's not just that. It's not just the people who came up with, I predicted the election wrong. It's beyond the small numbers game. It's the whole idea that, Trump would never be our president, that, the people, again, I hate to keep it being up on them, people in Vox who just wrote these articles that you look back on are just like, I tweeted it just now. Ezra Klein wrote an article, can we just finally admit that Hillary Clinton's a great politician? I mean,
you know why he wrote that? I mean, here's the most cynical interpretation of why he wrote that, because he wanted access.
I know he did, but that's
granted exclusive interviews with Hillary. So of course he's not going to say Hillary is a remarkably shitty politician, even though it was true. He had to say what was most favorable to her.
But that's kind of why people were sick of the whole system, right? Because the system is corrupt. And I go back to the corrupt. I wrote a Twitter stream about this, and I'm sorry to keep going back to banking, but that's what I knew for 20 years. I said the corruption, the emails, all those things that kind of just sit around Hillary like this bad smell that kind of just remind me a lot of the banking crises, the what I call them the acronyms, the LIBOR scandal, the FX fix. They're things that to bankers were standard practice. How we did business, quid pro quo. I mean, you took a client out for dinner and took him to a nice show and maybe a strip club, and then they came back and they bought 20 bonds from you the next day. That's just how business went. And if at dinner they told you some really cool, information about their trip to Brazil, then you nudge the guy who is doing the allocation for the next deal to try to favor them. When exposed like that, when open to the public and looked at, it's all very unseemly. But when you're in it, you don't feel as unseemly. This is just how we do it. And I think there's a lot of things like the Goldman Sachs talks with Clinton, just the Clinton Foundation stuff, the access to journalism, that when you take a step back and you just look at it, it's corrupt. It's not bags and money being handed over corrupt, but it's exchanging favors for information, for access corrupt. And I think they just can't understand. The point I'm trying to get in a long-winded way is they don't know it's corrupt. So they really just look at it like, what do you mean? I just gave a talk for 250,000.
And here's another thing. So the fact of those Goldman Sachs speech.
But I just want to go. Just what we were saying is, of course, Vox was buying through laudatory, cheesy articles about, almost, what's the word? Hagiography? They're talking about saints. Hagiographies of Clinton, and everything was spun positive. That, of course, they were looking for access to the administration, the incoming administration, so they could profit physically. So their careers would make money.
They did but they're responsible for this. I mean, they helped enable it.
They
did the same thing in the Democratic primary. So it wasn't just for the general election. They worked overtime to insist to everybody that this Bernie stuff was unrealistic and get over yourself and eat your vegetables and go with Hillary. That was their mantra during the primary.
Yes, and a lot of people did that. And let me tell you that this pivot to the other thing about the lack of enthusiasm for Hillary, and this is what I keep on hammering on. I pushed back on Krugman on this because he said something like, deep truth. Bernie would be getting the same treatment in the tree. No
way.
There are two common things.
Let me just dwell on that point for a second. Bernie did not have a quasi-governmental, multi-billion-dollar enterprise that operated all around the world and whose activities were not scrutinized journalistically or independently assessed, which had vast corruptive potential and we later learned was confirmed is being probed by the FBI. That's the Clinton Foundation. Okay, so Bernie didn't have that problem to deal with. Bernie also was not under federal criminal investigation for committing felony offenses. That was not a characteristic of Bernie. Okay, that was a characteristic of Hillary. But the Iglesias and the Vox people all said, no, this is a nothing burger. Don't worry about it. But obviously, I mean, if you're under felony criminal investigation, even if you dispute the merits of the investigation, politically, of course, it's going to be a problem for you, or a liability. But these people who are the Hillary loyalists, that's what I call them, they did everything they could to downplay the significance of her flaws and liabilities. So they are directly culpable for this.
Well, I would go again. What I wanted to say was, and I don't necessarily agree with everything you said, but I agree with the tone. I agree with the overall assessment. What I would say was, one of the things that just struck me, looking back, and I remarked on it, I think, like multiple times, of being in towns. These are towns that, the stereotypical Trump, the now stereotypical Trump town, the place with an empty lot where a factory used to be that now has barbed wire around it and angry people driving around in trucks with Confederate flags on them. I found people who love Bernie, and it wasn't just you go into. I'm used to going to these tables at McDonald's or wherever, and talking to people and saying I'm open and saying I'm a Hillary person or I'm a Democrat, and getting people to say, oh, I'll pray for you. But then and there's some really nasty stuff said about Hillary, really really nasty stuff. But every once in a while, out of the blue, would be someone like, I love Bernie. And they're like, there's this one guy I'll never forget in Huntington, West Virginia. He's like, he had the thickest Southern drawl. He was the oldest redneck military guy. He looked like your stereotypical Trump voter. And the man he called him Old Man Bernie. He's like,
during the primary, so there was this trope that the Bernie phenomenon was sort of superficial, or it wasn't what it seemed, because most of the people supporting Bernie were not themselves socialists. So there was a contingent of Bernie people who were even some conservatives. There was independents. There was sort of non-ideological, anti-establishment just types. There's a whole variety of people who were supporting Bernie, not solely because they agreed with socialism, but because they agreed with Bernie as they perceived it. So that was used to detract from him. But actually, that would have been a huge benefit to Bernie, because it showed that he would have the ability to bring on board people of disparate beliefs because they saw him as uncorrupted.
I think that's very.
It's largely not a matter of people wanting somebody who's particularly left, although that exists. it's wanting somebody who's not brimming with just the most blatant corruption and lies that they're just so sick of at this point.
Well, in my paradigm, and again in my narrative, in my little toy model, it's the elite insiders versus the outsiders, white outsiders, and Clinton played right into that stereotype of being, because she was part of the insiders. There was nobody more insidery than her, and about her orbit was this whole insidery apparatus of acolytes who were in the journalism, acolytes in the media, who just,
and she was so insulated.
And Bernie
had no political instincts.
And Bernie had none of that, and so that whole, and that whole message of, we're going to overthrow the system, wouldn't have played against Sanders at all. Wouldn't have played against them. And I think,
even Neera Tanden in one of the WikiLeaks emails, she said, and she was correct. She said, "Oh, Hillary's instincts are, quote, suboptimal." So why would they become suboptimal? Maybe because you're in this bubble all your life, not all your life, over the past 25 years, where you don't interact with normal people. I mean, when you're first lady and then you're senator and then you're secretary of state, you're not going. I mean, you might have these kind of like listening tours or whatever. You're not really interacting with people, so of course you don't know on an intuitive level what their concerns are. And that's what damned Hillary. I mean, she's it's almost in a way not even her fault, because she just has no ability to be exposed to people who are outside of these elite orbits.
I mean, as somebody who, I've been reading a lot about the rise of the Third Reich, coincidentally, and there's this thing in my head that's frustrating me, which is that, because I all see this as kind of predictable. This has all come from a massive inequality that we've created in this country, and out of inequality comes identity politics. And what's bothering me is why does fascism always seem to be the solution and not socialism? Why does fascism beat out socialism? Because socialism it can come into the same vacuum and save and solve a lot of the same problems without a lot of the hate. And it really upsets me. What upsets me most about this election is we could have gone a different route. We could have had a Bernie versus Trump election.
And Bernie would have won easily, I'm telling you. He really would have.
I think so as well. And I think so.
And we have to, I mean, we can't let slide that certain people who we can identify were responsible for this. I mean, they rigged the Democratic primary. Now, it wasn't literally rigged in the sense that they were stealing votes for the most part, but they manipulated it.
But that goes back to the whole overarching narrative that there's a corrupt, and I mean corrupt in a soft corruption, not hard corruption. There's this corrupt insider group that has built things for themselves. I call them the front row kids. Other people call them other things that have. And now they've done.
By the way, your coinage of the front row versus back row kids is catching on, because I'm getting emails and messages on Twitter now using that as a frame of reference. So congratulations.
And I came up with it by accident. But they did some very good things. Okay, I mean, as Matt Stoller writes in his wonderful piece, they came in and they changed Washington, and part of what they got was they fighting for racial equality. So
yeah, that's a great piece. Everybody should read it. Google Matthew Stoller, Atlantic. I don't know.
I don't think there's a better piece right now that goes into the nuts and bolts of.
I loved how he used the populist Democratic congressman from Texas.
Right. It's a really
the organizing kind of theme of the piece.
I mean, it's stuff I lived through, and I feel like I kind of all knew and I all assumed, but the details he goes into just really are wonderful and puts it a lot in perspective. But so it's one of the things I keep saying is that we've had this revolution over the last 30 years that these front row kids did, where they reordered our society, which was a hierarchy based on race and gender, and demanded that it no longer be based on that. And that's great, and that's a wonderful thing for which the minorities will continue to vote for them, and why the minorities continue to vote for them, because it's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful thing. But at the same time, they switched to a hierarchy based on education, and then in addition, they allowed a situation where the people who are in the inside at the top of the hierarchy got a lot more compensation, the winner take all. So it was flipping the hierarchy and then rewarding the winners a lot more than the losers. And that really confused a lot of people because it changed everything. And I just want to go to one last point, which is that to me, that I overuse word, the salient point is, so now when you're in a community that's been left behind, if you're a loser or a back row kid, we also have this false narrative in this country that we have a meritocracy, where if all you have to do to get to the top is get a good education, just get an education and you can succeed. The problem is, A, that's not true. When you grow up in certain places, you just don't have the access to that education. But B, when you fail, if you fail to make it, it's now your fault. And that's humiliating as fuck. So the losers said, well, you didn't make it, man, and you should have just studied harder. Or to feed into the thing that a lot of people now claim about Trump voters is you're just dumb. And that's a stinging word to tell somebody.
Yeah, people should go read that Matthew Stoller piece in its entirety. It's long, but it's worth it. Just for context on what we just touched there. But and being on this trip, and I've made a point to speak to Trump voters all throughout this process, but I've really, done it intensively over the past 12 days or whatever. And that has really hardened my resolve to push back on this notion that they're just dumb people. That enrages me. I want to tell just one anecdote about a person that I met in Portsmouth, Ohio, which was a very depressed town on the Ohio River across from Kentucky, and there's not much going on there at all. People constantly reference the drug problem there, and it's full of poor white people. So at the hotel I was at, I just struck up a chat with one of the cleaning women. She's probably mid-40s, and I just asked her what she was thinking about the election. She said, "Oh, I can't vote." I said, "Why not?" She said, "I have a felony conviction." So I said, "Oh, what happened?" She was willing to talk about it. She said, 5 years ago or so, she was in a car with the father of her children in a trailer park nearby, and they were pulled over. They were stopped by the cops on some BS motor vehicle infraction, which never happened. So the cops always have a pretext to pull people over if they want. And there ended up being meth in the car, and it was the I guess then boyfriend. I don't know what she referred to the guy as at the time, but it was the man's stuff.
Baby daddy.
Yeah, or I think it was maybe ex-husband. I don't know. But he ended up blaming her for it, so they both got charged. So she has got a felony drug conviction. She had to spend a couple days in jail, and he's currently imprisoned. and she got out and she worked hard, and she's in a better place now, and she's not using or anything. But she thought that she was ineligible to vote because of the felony drug conviction. So I didn't think that was true, because there are actually only a handful of states now which permanently bar people from voting if they have felony convictions. One of which actually is Kentucky, which is right across the river. So maybe she had heard of it with reference to Kentucky and assumed it applied to Ohio, but it actually did not. And so I said, "Hey, you're able to vote." And she said, "Okay, I'll look into it." Blah blah blah. And I said, "If you could vote, who would you vote for?" She said, "Trump." It was partially because she had sort of a cultural affinity with him. Partially, she didn't like Hillary. Same as most people. But the idea that this woman should be characterized as deplorable or irredeemable, I mean, that's incredibly offensive to me personally now. I mean, because once you interface with enough of these people, the demonization of them impacts you directly, and
I have two things. One is,
let me just finish the story. Because you develop a bond of empathy with them, you don't want to see them sneered at by these obnoxious people on their high horses. And then the other thing that struck me, I want to hear your thought on it, but just to wrap up the anecdote, another thing that struck me is that this is a woman who had dealt with a lot of really severe state repression. So in addition to the drug arrest, which was bogus, she ended up getting, earlier this year, or maybe it was prior year, recently, she ended up getting pulled over on the highway by a sheriff's deputy who had just scanned her license plate. So there was no motor vehicle infraction. She had committed.
It's pretty common.
Yeah, and it's horrible. It's a huge civil liberties infringement. So cops just sit on the side of the road scanning license plates now. And if it pops up that you got a warrant, you're pulled over, even if you weren't speeding, you didn't, make a wrong turn or whatever. So she got pulled over, and it turned out that the court had erroneously issued an arrest warrant for her for some child support non-payment, even though she had made the payment. So she ended up getting pulled over, searched, her whole car searched, her person searched on the side of the road on the highway, and she was humiliated. Obviously the nature of the police, and she went to the court and they removed the warrant and she got it sold, whatever. So the nature of the state repression that she experienced is different qualitatively than, say, what an inner city black person would experience, but they're both forms of state repression. So why can't we somehow unite those two groups to fight state repression broadly and get a more just criminal justice system? I mean, I think part of the reason why we can't do it is because the media class purposely divides those groups along racial lines.
I think they also self-divide themselves, but I would say that
they self-divide because they're divided geographically. I mean, they don't.
I would say that
amongst each other.
What I want to go back to is two things you pointed to in that story that I've heard over the course of 5 years. I hear that story once a week, twice a week. I work with addicts primarily, and that's that version of that story I hear over and over and over and over. Three things I would like to say about that. One is you said the word humiliation, which is huge in my world. It's humiliating, and what's humiliating is, and I think that's a lot of the source of the anger that is being channeled into Trump, is humiliation. And that humiliation doesn't just come from things like you said about being pulled over and searched on the side of the road. It's what you also said about people making fun of her, calling her deplorable. The communities recognize that. They get mocked and made fun of. And the whole community rallies around and say, so when people make fun of kind of poor whites as rednecks, white trash, hicks, it's humiliating, and the whole town feels it. So when people ask why are people doing well in the town supporting Trump, it's partially out of that. There's a community saying, well, why are you attacking us? Why are you making us act? Why are you
Yeah, it's a group. It's an in-group solidarity.
Yes, exactly, in-group solidarity. And going back to, go back to the empathy point. I grew up in a town like that before I went to Wall Street. I came from a very small redneck town, and so a lot of the people who are voting for Trump are people I went to, elementary school with, and I played football with, and people who, I got into fist fights with over racial issues. But I know them as people, not as cartoon characters. And so I feel like there's a better, you have a better prism into that. But in terms of anecdotes, I would just want to go back to an anecdote that you were part of. When we went to Lewiston, Maine, we went to the Acme Social Club, which is a blue-collar, members-only bar. And I went back.
Members only, right?
What?
Not quite members only. I mean,
yeah. Well, you pay $5 a year, you can be a member. I'm now a member.
Or if you sweet talk them, they'll let you in.
Yeah, I'm now a paid-up member of Acme Club, Snowshoe Club, Acme Snowshoe Club. I went back last weekend to Lewiston without you. Sorry. And I went to the Acme Club, and just like before when we were there, I struck up a conversation with, a guy who cuts lumber and is your Trump voter.
And by the way,
right?
Trump did. I mean, as predicted, as I predicted, and I think some others, Trump did end up winning that congressional district. Yeah. And he won an extra electoral vote.
It was interesting, and you remember the bartender? What was his name? Gary. So just like before, he was there, and
the son of the owner, right?
Yeah, Gary had just come back that day. He was just in there with his wife and child. They had just come back from a Trump rally in Portland, 35 miles away. They had come back. They'd taken the whole family to the Trump rally on that Friday, and he welcomed me back into the club. Thank you. Hey, good to see you.
Nice guy.
Yeah, a nice guy. And all three of them were voting for Trump. And I started talking to the wife, his wife, who I wrote her name down. I forget. She was very proud to have taken her daughter to meet Trump. And she works in the schools, public schools. And as we all know, as we know, as you and I know, there is a large Somali population in Lewiston that's causing a lot of problems.
Yeah, and I specifically talked.
They themselves are not causing a lot of problems. There's been a lot of problems with the community dealing with the Somali population. Let me rephrase that.
Yeah, and I specifically talked to this guy about the Somali population when we visited, and he said he was.
Yeah. I remember that conversation.
He was very kind about them, and he said that they were great. And I mean, he said that whenever there are problems, it's not with the kids, it's with the adults.
Yes. I'll never forget that phrase. He said, I go on school trips and my kids get along. The kids don't have a problem. The kids don't have a problem with you. It's us adults who have a problem with
I mean, he said his daughter has friends who are, Somali girls.
So I met his daughter there, and I met his wife. And his wife is a special education in the public schools in Lewiston. And she's a Trump fan. And they voted for Trump, and she said, "Look, I have no problems with the Somalis. I love having them in my class. I welcome them in my community." She says, "I'm a special eds kid, and I can tell you she goes, I'll be blunt. When I have a parent-teacher conference, the Somali parents are more likely to come. They're more likely to care about their children. They're more likely to attend. The children are more respectful of teachers." And she had nothing but effusive praise for the Somali community in Lewiston. And this is entirely.
But a person like that doesn't exist according to the popular media.
No, it doesn't, not at all. And and very few people who are judging that person is stuck in that situation where they're working in a town with they're struggling necessarily economically. Or they're not doing great economically, and they're dealing with a population that's gone from 0% to 10% of their town. That's a big change, and there's going to be some problems that are generated by that change. Sadly.
By the way, another anecdote about the Somali population of Lewiston. I guess the day after the Billy Bush Access Hollywood video or tape came out, we went to downtown in Lewiston, sort of separated. I went to walk around, and I found the Gary Johnson main headquarters, which was in Lewiston for whatever reason. I went in and was just chatting with the woman who was, running it. She had contacted the campaign, and she had sort of volunteered to run it. She was a Republican. Maybe it was nonpartisan, but she was a Republican local school board official. And she had voted for Trump in the main caucus in the Republican primary process. And then she said Trump but she hadn't, her husband had a health issue, so she hadn't paid all that much attention to the campaign because she was caring for her husband. But then, in her capacity as school board, I think it was school board. It was some local position. I have to double check. I have the notes somewhere. But in whatever capacity she held, she was an emissary to the Somali population. And she was telling me about the distinctions between the Somali population. So there's, I think we talked about this, but there's the more upper class Somalis and then the lower class Somalis who were discriminated against in Somalia.
And in Lewiston.
Right. So there's a whole class dynamic there, just within that subculture. She was telling me all about that, but she said that she became a Gary Johnson supporter when one day, maybe it was a couple months ago, Trump came to Portland and he made some kind of incendiary comment about the local Somali population. And she said it caused a big controversy and everyone was upset about it, blah, blah, blah. And that caused her to actually abandon Trump and become a Gary Johnson supporter to the degree that she was running the Gary Johnson office in Maine. Now, I never went and checked to see the exact quote from whatever Trump appearance that was, but he ended up doing much the same thing in Minnesota on, what was it, Sunday night? So Minnesota ended up being much closer than anybody would have fathomed. I mean, I think Hillary only won it by 1.5 points, which is just nuts. But Trump made a last-minute appearance there and made some kind of inflammatory comment about.
He made pretty bad comments.
Yeah, that was that was a horrendous comment. I mean, there's no way to no need to beat around the bush.
But
anyway, I guess that's the extent of the anecdote.
I mean, I just think that I think yes, there's a lot of racist supporters of Trump. There is, I've run into a fair number of them. I run into. I mean, what percent? I don't know what percent. It's not a high percent. It's not over 20%. It's not over 15%.
And but the ones that are racist, I mean, are generally not like. It's become this meme in these liberal commentary circles that white nationalism is on the rise. And, to the extent that is on the rise, it's a tiny subset. That's an ideology. I mean, you have to read like a book to know what white nationalism.
I haven't come in across any what I would call white nationalists. None.
I did come across one in New Hampshire during the primary, so I will concede that I did find one who was going around to different Trump events. So that was, and he actually confronted. This was funny. He actually confronted Ted Cruz, at an event. I guess this was September of
February.
This was January of 16.
January. I was there. Not the.
This guy confronted Ted Cruz because he thought he was a phony on immigration and blah blah blah. So I did find that one guy, but. Over the course of your everyday experience, you're not going to find these mythical ideological white nationalists that everybody's so obsessed with.
I haven't run across them, and I've looked actually. I've tried my best to find them. But I haven't gone to a Trump rally in a while. So, all right. Well, I think it's probably time we sign off. Anything else? Anything you want to ask?
One more quick point. And this is just sort of an amusing curiosity. I actually did. I attended my final Trump rally in Raleigh, North Carolina, on Monday. I don't really have much to say about that. That's interesting. Although he did prophesy that it was going to be Brexit plus 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 the following day, and that was basically correct. Actually, that leads into what the final point that I wanted to make, which is that we mentioned this non-accountability in the pundit commentary journalism racket. I think we have to just pause and acknowledge that probably the most accurate pundit of the entire 2016 cycle was Trump himself. I mean, as incredible as that is to say, his theory of how the race would unfold was basically correct at every turn from the primary on. He said, hey, there was, all these incredulous journalists. Hey, how are you going to win the general election? There's all these demographics and all these blah, blah, blah. He said, you know what? I'm going to go to the Rust Belt. I'm going to tell them to get their jobs back. I'm going to tell them that they've been screwed over and that the system is rigged and that the political class is corrupt. I'm going to win Michigan. And I'm going to win Pennsylvania. I'm going to win Ohio. And hey, maybe I'll even win Wisconsin. Guess what? He won all 4 of those states. I mean, that's absurd that he won Wisconsin.
Well, I think when I look back is, I just want to say one thing. If anybody is listening out there, if you want to tweet a question, if it's just not me and this man here yelling at each other, tweet a question and we'll both take a turn answering it before we go. I do these little things every once in a while. I started driving around the country around 2013, so 3.5 years. And in that time, I think I put 190,000 miles on my car. The last 100,000 basically since Trump announced. And I always categorize as places I look at that are suffering the most. I call it anomie, the sociological term. What places has the worst anomie, the most anomie? And I've always put on the list is the Rust Belt.
ANOIMIE, right?
ANOMIE. It's a term that Durkheim, who created sociology back in the 1890s, was studying suicide, and he came up with a theory about why people kill themselves. And it's people who have what he called anomie, which is they don't feel part of a group, they don't feel integrated, or they're not regulated. There's kind of this feeling meaninglessness. And so I always say that I'm doing it. My tour of America, my driving America is called Anomie in America. But by that measure, by places that look to me are hurting the most, are the most left behind, where people that feel the most humiliated, is the Rust Belt and all of the United States. And I've put 180,000 miles on my car driving across the United States. I've seen a lot of the United States, except for the West Coast. I haven't seen the West Coast, but up until the Rocky Mountains. And there are no places hurting as much as the Rust Belt. And it's hurting very specifically because it lost jobs to NAFTA. And, this whole argument in the pundosphere and everything, Jesus fucking Christ, can we just admit this is a lot about losing jobs that left.
One of the most absurd moments of the...
I mean, go to those towns. They're gone. They're gone.
One of the most ridiculous moments in just the commentary racket, I mean, it was Rachel Maddow fact-checking. So there's this fetish and a cult of fact-checking now. I mean, obviously you should check facts, but fact-checking as such has morphed into this weird ideology. Where Rachel Maddow fact-checked in the first debate, and he said, Trump at one point said to Hillary, "Your husband signed NAFTA." So Rachel did her big fact-checking of this and said that no, Trump, Bill Clinton didn't sign NAFTA. H.W. Bush signed NAFTA. That was just fact. That was just wrong. I mean, H.W. Bush set in motion the process which led to the enactment of NAFTA. But Bill Clinton signed the final bill.
Bill Clinton's. I mean, I was there. I mean, I was there in Wall Street when that was the signature achievement. That's what caused the bailout of Wall Street in '93 or '94, the collapse of Mexico. NAFTA was Bill Clinton's signature achievement and his new president to prove that he was. It was kind of Nixon going to China moment. Bill Clinton was going to get a Democrat was going to get NAFTA through.
You mentioned the Rust Belt having the most sort of enemy. I think that's. I mean, I haven't been to the entire. I mean, over the course of this election, kind of observing tour. I haven't been to in the whole of the Rust Belt, but like the Rust Belt, I would set as distinct from Appalachia, right? So
Yeah, but Appalachia's
Appalachia is in that category, but there's sort of
Appalachia's had it for since 1910, since 18.
right.
So I mean, it's about the pace of change, right? If anything, Appalachia is doing a lot better, than it has been at 1920s or 1930s. It's had a bad, rough 8 years because of coal industry has fallen apart, which has nothing to do with nobody. That's just life. And
I bring that up because I met this guy in Hickory.
Wait, there's actually someone asked a question. Hey, you want to take a question
on Twitter?
Yeah.
Okay, hold the question. Let me just finish the thought real quick. The reason why I brought up Appalachia in contrast to North Carolina is because the concerns overlap, right? So I was in Hickory, North Carolina, where Mike Pence came and did a rally that was massively well attended at this little regional airport.
By the way, that guy's our vice president. Jesus Christ.
Yeah. So this was a little local airport, but he filled it to over capacity and people couldn't get in, and it was huge turnout. I was shocked at the turnout. I mean, this was a heavily Republican area, but still, I didn't think that this sort of bland vice presidential candidate would get so many people out. While I was in Hickory, I met this guy who's poor white guy, 40s maybe, who lives out in the bushes somewhere. He was kind of like cagey about what his actual living arrangement is. We just struck up a conversation about the election, and they said, "Oh yeah, NAFTA sucks. We lost our jobs because of NAFTA. It would be a good idea to get a border wall." So I said, "Okay, this is the perfect natural Trump supporter, right?" So I said, "Are you going to vote for Trump?" He's like, "Nah, voting doesn't matter." So, I feel like if the Trump operation maybe had a more capable voter outreach effort, they could have gotten a lot of people who were not.
Well, just think about it. Think about if Bernie was running, what we would have had.
Yeah.
So I have a question.
Okay, what is the question?
What will happen to most of the country economically? Will the suffering get worse? Will deplorables double down on Trumpism?
I don't know. I'm not an economic forecaster. I'm kind of sick of this prediction game. People always want to predict what's going to happen. I mean, that consumes so much of the coverage of the election. Make a prediction, and what the latest poll say? Some of that has value, but it dominated so much of the discussion. I don't know. I mean, I think there's a possibility that we're headed towards some kind of crash or decline. I mean, but I don't know. I'm not an expert on this.
That was my job for 20 years, so I'll answer it. What will happen to the country economically? Will the suffering get worse? I believe that all predictions are scary to make, but I believe that I think that Trump increases the risk of an economic problem, and that's what really worries me, because I'll pivot a little bit more to, will he be able to solve the things he claims he's going to solve? And I think no. I think he's overpromised. And I think, will he be able to return jobs to the Rust Belt? No. Will he be able to, stop the flow of immigration? No.
Wait, hold on a second. Let's just probe that for a second. We don't know yet. I mean, is it possible that if you implemented the Pat Buchanan economic program or whatever, I mean, it hasn't been tested yet. We don't know. It could. I don't know. I mean, again, I'm not an expert in this arena. I don't know, but I don't think you should 100% say that no, it can't work ever.
It's not going to happen in the first 2 years of his presidency, by which people will start getting tired and angry. And I really worry that if he starts having a problem, if something goes wrong in his first 2 years, if voters start turning on him, he's going to pivot to cheap scapegoating to try to prop up his presidency. And
yeah, I would agree that is a danger. Yeah,
and I think that could go really ugly really quickly.
But I mean, I think it's so silly to try to. I mean, this is uncharted territory, right? So we don't know what's going to happen.
Where do you think the Democrats go from here? Their vision for 2020. Back to Bernie.
Oh, here's a point that I wanted to make earlier. I'm glad somebody raised that question. After one of the reasons that I was a soft Brexit supporter, not that I'm a British citizen and could vote, but like one reason why I thought, hey, it might be a good thing if Brexit happened, and I think you agree with that, right? You're a soft Brexit supporter, roughly.
I was much more a Brexit supporter than I am a Trump supporter.
Okay. Yeah. Well, same here, actually.
I didn't really want either, but I understood Brexit more than I understand Trump. So
right. So one of the reasons why I thought Brexit might produce positive effects is because it seemed apparent to me that in the wake of a Brexit, Corbyn's strength within the Labour Party would be Corbyn would be strengthened within the context of the Labour Party, because it would be a sort of a quote unquote disruptive event. It would shift the sort of center of gravity in the Labour Party, and the old kind of Blairite establishment would lose its grip. I mean, it already had lost its grip because Corbyn had won, but it would be permanently, it would be really thoroughly repudiated. So sure enough, the anti-Corbyn elements in the party launched this really feckless, boneheaded coup attempt to oust Corbyn after Brexit, because he was seen as not having campaigned as hard enough for Remain, even though he was nominally in favor of Remain. He had voted in 1976 against joining the European Union, when he was a younger man in his 30s. But he had, for a whole host of reasons, come out as a sort of soft Remainer. So the anti-Corbyn wing of the Labour Party tried to launch a coup attempt and try to oust him, and they failed miserably. And they launched a leadership election for the second in 2 years, and Corbyn won resoundingly over this kind of like no-name guy, Owen Smith. So Corbyn's mandate within the Labour Party was strengthened in the wake of Brexit, because Brexit sort of shifted the fundamental assumptions underlying British politics and left a vacuum that Corbyn was able to fill. So I think what could happen in the Democratic Party, we don't have a perfectly analogous situation where we could call a leadership election, because it's not a parliamentary. We don't have a parliamentary democracy, and it's different from the UK. But I think Bernie Sanders is now effectively the head of the Democratic Party. So the Clintons have been totally discredited. They're gone. I mean, I think they're pariahs now. I mean, I think Hillary will live out. Hillary is a national disgrace. Bill's a national disgrace. They are just utter jokes now. The Clinton brand is forever tarnished. Thank God. They are now will live out in infamy. So who's next in line to take up the mantle of the Democratic Party? It's Bernie. The party will sort of reorganize itself in his image in a way that's analogous to what happened in the UK with Corbyn. That's what I think.
I'm not as crazy about the Clinton. I'm not crazy about the Clintons, but I'm less harsh on them than you are. But I think there was a battle about which way to approach.
So you don't think Hillary is a national disgrace?
I don't want to. I wouldn't say that.
Why? I mean, she lost to a reality TV show host and beauty pageant proprietor.
There was a battle to pivot. They had a choice. They could have gone for the Bernie supporters, or they could have gone for the soft Republicans, and they went with the soft Republicans, and it lost.
Okay, but how do you make such a historic blunder and not be in that? Like, what would you have to do to become a national disgrace? Your legal problems. Cheryl Mills, one of her closest aides, didn't want her to run, but she ran anyway because she's so egotistical.
I think she's going to be Dukakisized for a while. So yes, in that level.
It's worse than Dukakis. Dukakis was running against the sitting vice president, who had the entire machinery of the Reagan.
The point I wanted to make. The only point I was going to make.
I mean, she's like a uniquely parasitic person now.
We have to answer more questions. The only point I was going to make was that they had a choice to pivot to the Clintons could have tried to run a campaign that was heading towards the left or to the center. They went for the center, and I think that's going to So I agree with you that it's going to leave a vacuum that someone can fill. Enemy, you say less church, less bowling leagues, less community. What is the answer? I unions, I think, is my number one answer to kind of the suffering of meaninglessness in these towns. I think the changing nature of the jobs has really, really, I don't mean this in a derogatory way, but the feminization of the workplace, meaning in communities I go to, there's a men feel kind of demasculated because they're no longer working masculine jobs, but service.
Emasculated is the word. Emasculated.
What is it?
It's emasculated. IMMASCULATED.
They feel that.
Yeah.
and because the jobs that are available, the service industry jobs are traditionally feminine jobs. So I think there's a real kind of crisis of angry white men who are angry that we've given blacks rights and are angry that we've given women rights. And I think it hurts at a very personal level in terms of the workplace. So in terms of the enemy thing, I think one thing you have to go back to is kind of unions that kind of gave solidarity in the workplace. But working at a McDonald's is for a global corporation, almost corporate colonialism. These towns are corporate colonialism. All the companies that are there have no own. There's no sense of community. They're just places you go to work and leave. Next.
Yeah, I agree. I agree on unionization. You'll notice that Trump, I don't believe, ever once actively demonized union members. I mean, in fact, he tried to court them. I mean, he sent out tweets praising the Teamsters. He got the Fraternal Order of Police endorsement, the national organization, which is an organized labor entity, in part because he was seen as more favorable to unionization than other Republicans. So Mitt Romney did not get the endorsement of the Fraternal Order of Police in 2012 because he endorsed a whole host of anti-union ballot initiatives, and Trump didn't do that. I mean, so that was sort of a break from Republican orthodoxy. Just to touch on how people, the question of sort of atomization and enemy can be ameliorated. So the unionization thing is one thing. That's a huge issue, and it's hard to.
We have another question.
Well, let me just make the quick point. I think the internet actually has potential to help with this. So a lot of the people who are especially atomized are older people who didn't grow up on the internet and don't have an instinctive feel for how to use it to forge social bonds. So you can use it to find people in your area and to meet with them, develop a real life connection with them. For older people, they don't really know that to the same degree that younger people do.
I think, and I'm an older person, so it's something I'm realizing. Talk about going forward. Will Trump be his nasty self, or will he shed that candidate jacket? Says a person who's from Kingsport years ago. I love Kingsport. It's a great town, Kingsport, Tennessee.
Okay, I think I wrote a Medium post about 9 days or so ago, just kind of contemplating how Trump might end up moderating or trying to make a deal, quote unquote, with the left. So the basic premise is, if you think back to the Republican primary, what was the big argument against Trump from his fellow Republicans? It was that he's not a true conservative. It's that he deviated from conservative orthodoxies, right? So that's still true. I mean, one of the most hilarious and I think illustrative ways that Trump described himself, and I was actually at a rally in New Jersey where he did this, the quote was, "I'm a conservative, but who cares?" So it's just like he doesn't really care about adhering to, the movement conservative program. So I don't think there's anything stopping him from forging alliances with the progressive elements of the Congress, say, to get an infrastructure bill done. I don't know temperamentally or personally how much he'll moderate, if at all. That's something I can't predict. I don't know. I just think he's gonna do whatever he can to make the best deals. I mean, that's his guiding philosophy, right? He's the master deal maker. He can do deals that nobody else can. He can do a deal to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. He said, actually.
I think it's anybody's guess what the hell he's going to do as a president. I think right now there's never been anybody in Washington who's getting so many people sucking up to him, trying to get him, because he's a sock puppet in the wind. I mean, he can go whichever way. I don't know where he's going to go.
And it's a totally unprecedented situation. Like, we have to emphasize this. There has never in the entire history of this country been somebody who has ascended to the presidency in this kind of trajectory. Nothing that has come close. So it's a fool's errand to try to predict what's gonna happen. I mean, not only was he the first major party nominee who was not an office holder since 1948, Wendell Willkie for the Republicans. He's the only president-elect ever now to have not held elected office and to be come from the business world. So it's anybody's guess. I just think his ascendance has to be. I mean, I know this is going to sound hyperbolic, and maybe it's a little biased toward the present, but my sense is it may well be the most spectacular electoral triumph in the history of the United States. I mean, I'm willing for someone to dispute that, but given the odds and everything that was stacked against him, it could be.
I think it tells you how corrupt the what preceded it was. Question: Chris, can you please tell us about the Clinton relationship to Wall Street as seen from the inside? Thanks. I wrote a piece about that, and I'm gonna tweet it now. Basically, the Clintons deregulated Wall Street. No one is more responsible for the kind of environment created in Wall Street in the 90s and aughts, and the kind of lawlessness than the Clintons are. Prior to the Clintons' arrival as president, Bill Clinton's arrival as president, there was always Republicans were in Wall Street's pockets. Democrats were not so much, and there was always people. They were always at least a counterbalance to the kind of layover and let Wall Street do whatever you want. But when Clinton came in, that balance ended, because they also came into Wall Street and said, "We're going to be we're your people. We too want to play with you." And that changed entirely Wall Street, because it meant there was no longer a check on any political checks on Wall Street, and it became just open. Wall Street at that point just went crazy. Glass-Steagall was repealed in 98, 99. And it was just a shit show. And
this goes to why I've been so harshly critical of the Clintons, maybe more than you would be, because if you're integral in facilitating the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression, right, and then you're integral, so you're central to it. It may not have happened without your actions, and that would apply to the Clintons with respect to the financial crisis of 2008. And then you're integral in that it wouldn't have happened without Hillary. There's a good chance that it would not have happened without Hillary. If you are directly culpable for the worst foreign policy catastrophe that the country has embarked on since Vietnam, which was itself a huge catastrophe, without Hillary Clinton, the Iraq War may have never happened. So, and they have a ton of other problems, right, which should deserve harsh criticism, but just those two. I mean, so if those two don't justify harsh criticism and demand that they be accountable for their failures, what would? I mean, those are just beyond massive.
I think those two. I would say the things that's kind of made people question the integrity of the ruling class was TARP, financial crisis / TARP, and Iraq War. Those two right there are the things that give people the sense that Washington was corrupt. And it wasn't just and Clinton was right at the center of both of those. And so she was the absolute worst person to run as I'm now of the belief that a shoebox could beat Clinton. The shoebox.
Any Republican would have beaten her.
Apparently a shoebox that simply said, "I will lower your taxes." And
the thing is, it would have been. I said this from the very beginning. It's like 2014. I always said, a Republican is going to be favored regardless. A generic Republican will be favored because you have two polarizing years of Barack Obama, economy sort of middling along. There's a lot of discontent. The Republicans have a huge advantage of the local and state level. There was every reason to believe that a generic Republican would be favored against a generic Democrat. Now, it wouldn't be a given that the Republican would necessarily win, but there were structural advantages for the Republican in this year. So you would need a uniquely talented or qualified Democratic candidate to defeat the Republican. Hillary was the worst. Now, Trump had his own issues that he had to overcome, but the Democrats would have had to nominate a really singular talent to be able to get over the hurdles that would face anybody trying to get a third term for the party that had been in power for 8 years.
I think Bernie was different enough that he would not have felt like a continuation of the Obama years. So
exactly, it would have been he would have been a change agent. Hillary was not a change agent. She was.
I think we're echo chamber now because we're both Bernie fans. I think people outside will probably look at us and say we're just corrupt Bernie fans. I'm going to have to go to sleep, but it was really nice speaking.
Yes, I'm glad we did this today too, because it's good to.
It was also
get the thoughts with some kind of immediacy out there.
Right, and I would suggest we do it once every 2 weeks, sort of thing. And I invite you to my next trip to Lewiston, which is this week, and knowing you can't come, so it's an easy invite to make.
Yeah, I'm going to be on the road for a little while longer. I'm going to go to the Florida Panhandle after this, and I don't have a set schedule, but I'm just going to be gauging kind of voter reaction to the results.
If you want to go to my hometown, I was just there. It voted overwhelmingly for Trump, so overwhelming. I think it was. Last 2012, it was plus 15 for Romney. I think this time it was plus 35 for Trump.
Yeah, that's the thing. So voter. I mean, and we'll end after this, but voter turnout went down overall, right? But it went up among certain groups, and that was key to Trump winning. So I mentioned Hickory, North Carolina, where I was at for the Pence thing. Trump ended up getting more Republican votes out than Romney did by something like 20%. So
Twitter from
Trump found the missing white voter.
Twitter from 4:30 yesterday till 7:30 was an annoying celebration of, the Latino surge, which hit a buzzsaw.
Did that have any basis in fact at all, or was it just a media creation?
It hit the buzzsaw of a angry white surge, which just wasn't as cool for the media to portray. I mean, I was watching the Florida votes when the Panhandle came in. I mean, the Panhandle is Alabama. I mean, people forget that Florida is a very different place. It has 3 or 4 different regions. One of them is
but I'm sure people were celebrating when 7 p.m. came in Florida. The eastern portion of Florida came in because the Panhandle hadn't come in yet, but the Panhandle is like Republican Central.
Yes, and the part of the state that hadn't come in is where I'm from, and it's a very, believe me, like I said, my hometown. I think the area, the county I'm from is, I think, just one of the highest percentages to vote for Trump in the country. So
So here's the stat which I tweeted earlier. And again, one of the reasons why I love this post-election period is because there's so much data to delve into, which I haven't really scratched the surface of yet. But vote total for Catawba, Catawba, Catawba County, North Carolina, which is home to Hickory, where that Pence rally was. So Romney 2012, 44,386. Trump 2016, 48,062. I don't know. I forget what exactly what percentage increase that is, but that's a substantial increase. Yeah. And if you have that replicated all over the place, I mean, I think that accounts for why Trump won. So he boosted turnout among these sort of downscale Republican white voters. And then you had the Obama coalition collapsed for Hillary, and that was a perfect recipe for Trump to win.
Yeah, a shoebox could have beat Hillary. I'm now of that belief. A shoebox that simply had someone taped to it. I will lower your taxes.
Yeah.
All right. Thank
All
you
right,
so much.
let's go.
Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.